Sean Strickland had a gun. Did you guys see this? I'm assuming everybody did. This was something called, it was like a door ring bell, or it was just a security camera, but there was a couple of different angles from Sean's house. Surveillance, right? Some guy, dark of night, picture that, comes into a driveway and he dips down, does a squat in between two cars that are in the driveway. Well, it turns out those two cars and the driveway belong to Sean Strickland. So how Sean gets alerted, I don't know. But Sean came outside, in my opinion, with fairly good intention. I mean, he did not come out to beat somebody up. Oh, the guy's on my property. Like, you know, these gun guys are like, they sleep with their door unlocked, just holding their guns underneath their pillow. They're just hoping for that moment. It didn't seem like that. It seemed like perhaps Sean thought somebody was doing something to one of his vehicles, perhaps even trying to steal it, and he went out to make the guy stop. But either way, Sean ends up with a gun and keeps the guy at gunpoint until higher authorities come. Somewhere it was said the police, somewhere it was said it was security guards. Where'd the gun come from? I mean, if I watched the video, where did the gun come from? I did, and the video starts out with Sean walking out. It was as the camera was right here. And so and the camera just stays in place, so you don't see it until Sean walks into view, and then he cuts to a different view, of which it is now a different camera angle. I didn't see the gun. I didn't see the gun in his hand. I don't think he left the house with the gun in his hand. And you have to understand, first off, it was dark out. Second off, the gun was dark. And third, I'm watching on my phone, which is kind of small. So if the gun was in his hand, okay, fine. But I don't think it was in his hand. Where would the gun been? He came outside in like shorts and a t-shirt, right? I mean, it's not a situation where even if you were a concealed carry guy, there wasn't a situation where there would be a holster or someplace to put the gun. I don't know where he got the gun. Even when he held the gun on the guy, he held it southpaw. In a very good stance, I might add. It seems as though Sean Strickland has had training in this regard. Where did he get the gun? Where did the gun come from? And Sean Strickland is in a really interesting spot. Your career, in many ways, when it's done, and you guys can relate no matter what sport you did. Wouldn't matter if you stopped at 10 years old or you played through high school, something like this. It wouldn't matter. You could look back and your career looked something like a market, where you had your ups and your downs and you plateaued, right? Your record looks that way. Your own motivation and the way you felt about it, how much you liked the sport versus this became a drag when the end of the season comes. Like all of those things, when you overperform, one of two things happen, and it's only one of two things that happen. So in Sean's case, where he was a 7-1 underdog against Adesanya on relatively short notice, I believe it was 6 weeks. Okay. When you have that, you will either use that as a springboard. When you have one of these great, that's what I dreamed of moments, it will be a springboard into other things. Or a guy will become complacent. He will start to believe he's as good as some people say he is. Just for example, doesn't seem like a quality that Sean would have, but by example, it's going to be one of these two. It's either a springboard and he jumps levels and now he's better against everybody, or an athlete will come down, called resting on your laurels, and for the rest of their lives, talk about that night. Talk about their 15 minutes in the spotlight. Very common, but there's no third option. It's one of those two. Now, this seems, in many ways, like Sean's most important fight. There is something going on with this fight. I will at least tell you that much. There is something going on as to why this fight was booked on that date. Why they got Sean, why they got him so quick. Why the idea of having Chimaev and scrapping the idea of Chimaev and finding Du Plessis, and it got put together so quickly. I don't know what the answer is, but there's something there. A clue to support my thesis of how important this fight on this date is the fact that Paulo Costa got assigned to the same card, at least according to Paulo Costa. So, you're now talking about bringing in backup. You're going to book Paulo in a match, but you're going to have two 85-pounders. So that if anything happens to the main event, you've already got the guys ready so you can put them there, because the conclusion and the championship being concluded and figured out that night is extra important. Why? Why is it extra important? Why have we gone to these steps? Not one, not two, we now have 3 steps in place that are a little bit unusual, all to get a middleweight champion resolved on that date. My speculation is that Adesanya's 2027 retirement has changed his mind to a return at UFC 300. That is my speculation. And he will be competing with either a rematch, which would be very big, against Sean Strickland, or with the only thing bigger than a rematch, or rather than a title fight, a grudge match against Du Plessi. That is what I think, with no evidence whatsoever, by the way. And I'm wondering where Sean's at. I'm wondering where he's at. It feels like a tiny bit of a rush, but I only offer that because of the waits and delays that other champions have had to do. It feels like a little bit of a quick turnaround, but I only say that because Islam fought in February and didn't fight again until October. I only say it because Leon's last fight was in March and he still hasn't fought again since. So it felt like a little bit of a quick turnaround, not to mention Chimaev was named the #1 contender without unnaming him #1 contender, without even having an address of that subject. In comes Du Plessi. And without even having an opponent to announce, we find out Paulo's on the card. So it does seem as though resolution on that night is important. Okay, important to what? And that is where now my guess starts to come in. Important to what? I feel very confident in what I've said up until this point. I don't know what the plan for 300 is. I don't know what the plan for Adesanya is. That's the part where I'm beginning to speculate. And while it feels like a fast turnaround, right? And in normal times, it wouldn't. That's exactly when Sean should be fighting, in normal times. But for current times, it feels like it was sped up. And the fact that Sean was able to take on Adesanya on 6-week notice, of which it was even pulled at one point, and then it came back, and he was perfectly ready, would certainly make me believe that there's not going to be a problem in being ready for Du Plessi. But it is a big match, and it's an interesting match. And it's going to be a more interesting match, and it's going to be a bigger match as we start to find out, why did we make the match in the first place? And that's a story that may never be told. Why are we bringing in Paulo Costa? Why do we have backup? Why is it so important that we resolve this title on this specific night? And that might be a story that nobody chooses to tell for us. But I hope they do. Because the meaning and the stakes and the consequences, if I'm right, have never been higher. And one of the reasons that the hierarchy of big fights starts with grudge. All anybody does is talk about a title fight. They talk about top 10 guys. They talk about all these different things, which historically have never been guaranteed to draw money. Historically, to draw money, grudge is #1. Titles are #2, main events are #3. If you can combine them all, you've really got something there. But to have all of those things into one, it's important that whatever information anybody has, they reveal. They don't always agree with old Chael on that. A lot of times people think that business needs to be private. You got to keep it to yourself. So we may never know. But there's a reason Chimaev was swept without so much as a conversation. There's a reason that it is a relatively quick turnaround for Sean. There's a reason that DDP, who they did not want to give the opportunity to because they'd already offered it and he said no, was given that opportunity again. There's a reason Paulo Costa is booked on that exact same date at that exact same weight class. That part, I'm certain,